guess we're starting. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's GIC talk. My name is Bradley Weiss, and I am a volunteer here for GIC talk. Before we begin, please take a moment to make sure your cell phones are turned off or switched to silent mode. Dr. Shin, are you good? Okay. He's good, we're all good. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to tell you about a campaign that the GIC is currently engaged in to raise awareness about recycling. Here are a few tips for how you all can help. Consider using a reusable mug or container for your drinks instead of a disposable paper cup. Also, make sure to separate your garbage and please make use of the recycling bins at the entrance of the building. Moving on to the talk. Today's talk will be given by someone who is probably familiar to anyone who regularly attends the talk or to anyone who is even casually acquainted with the GIC, our very own director, Dr. Shin Gyonggu. Dr. Shin is a professor emeritus of English literature at Chonnam National University, who retired a year ago, last February, and since then he has been volunteering his time to serve as the full-time director here at the GIC. Today he will talk to us about an important topic in 20th century Korean history, the March 1st Independence Movement. And it's timely as well, as March is just around the corner. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Shin with a big hand.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Does this work? I have to give you some information in advance because I plagiarized the PowerPoint file from Professor George Kachapikas, who is witnessing my plagiarism here now. So from the cover, this is the drawing by Mr. Hong Seong-dang, who was quite widely known in propagating Gwangju Uprising through his painting. I think this is the outline of uprisings in Korea, produced by, again, Dr. Kachapikas, beginning with Donghak movement. Even though it was not so much national, still it covers most of South Korea. Mainly from Jeolla province, but the original leader was from Gyeongsang province, and then some from Gyeongsang province participated. And then March 1st movement is the first national movement. Everybody in Korea participated, not everybody, all regions except 3 counties participated in this uprising, which means it is the first national movement in Korea. And then Jeju, April 3rd, we usually name it massacre because 1/3 of the population killed by government forces under the command of General Robert. So even though the killing was not directly done by American soldiers, it was directed by American general, 1948. And then April 19th movement seems to be the first successful movement toppling the dictators at the time. So many people considered it initiate the worldwide student movement, 1960s and 1970s. And then, as you know, there were very small demonstrations against dictators, but Gwangju Uprising was the biggest afterwards. So I came back in 1981, and then I once read an article which says there was a statistics among college students which event after World War II is the most important in Korean history. 80% of students checked Gwangju Uprising. And then Korean War, in which more than 2.2 million people were killed, was second. Only 20% checked it. And then June 1987, we named it June Uprising, which made it possible for us to change the constitution from indirect election of the president into direct election. The continuous labor movement, not only in modern Korea but also even under Japanese colonialism, there were continuous labor movements. In a massive scale, 1980s and 1990s. Then the largest movement seems to be 2008 candlelight demonstration, which did not produce much because it was not so much national, but mostly in Seoul, and then there were not significant leaders of the movement. Again, from George. So this is Korea at that time. Japanese influence covers Korea, Manchuria, and then eastern part of China, including Nanjing, and then Shanghai, and then Taiwan, and then again to Indochina. So some statistics at the time. The population of Korea at the time was considered 18 million. So the modern way of statistics or census began only from near 1920. So 1910 statistics is simply assumption. The development of the movement, the beginning or causes, some hardships experienced by Koreans for the past 10 years before 1919, from the annexation to Japan. I will give you some more statistics later. And President Wilson doctrine influenced a lot. He proclaimed self-determination of the people under colonialism. So even though he did not do anything, simply proclaiming self-determination, so people around the world were influenced by that doctrine. And then Korean student movement in Japan, they initiated some movement in Japan. About several hundred students participated in the Declaration of Independence in Japan, Tokyo, Japan. And then the former king at that time, died suddenly. So some rumors spread around the nation that he was poisoned to death. The movement continued about 2 months, maybe more than 2 months. So when I was young, I thought it was a few days movement, but it continued to spread around the nation. At the time, the population 18 million, we assume that about 1 million people participated. Conservatively, 500,000, maybe progressively 2 million. So I chose 1 million. About 150 times, no, 1,500 times of demonstration occurred all around the nation. Officially, 7,500 people were killed. Injured 15,000, arrested 46,000. But the sentence levied on them were not as strict as it was in military dictatorship in Korea. Under military dictatorship, once you were accused, you had to serve at least 7 years in prison. So even we name it atrocities, it was much better than, or rather less painful than under the military dictatorship, which means even military dictatorship even worse than colonial treatment of the people. Examples of atrocities, but there are many. I will choose some. So in Suwon, near Seoul, a church was burnt. So about 30 people were forced to be gathered in church, and then they were burned to death. Those who tried to flee were shot to death. So afterwards, there were some pictures by missionaries, and then the pictures were spread around the world. And then this is April 15th event. Some people, when a person waved the flag, his arm was cut off. So that kind of event was quite frequent, and then the skull was crushed. Without pictures, we cannot accept the level of atrocities. This is the scene after the church was burnt. This is the picture in Yeonhee, at the time Severance Hospital, taken by a missionary. The person's arm was cut off both sides. So this kind of extreme atrocities were common at the time. And then one girl student who staged demonstration in near Chonnam. So near Chonnam we have Independence Hall there, and that hall was established in that place in commemoration of that incident. She was arrested, and then she shouted in the court continuously. So she was tortured frequently, and then she died. People say she was crushed to death. The exploitation under Japanese colonialism can be, we cannot imagine how bad it was. For example, about 50% of rice production went to Japan. So this is simply one example. All other products. So Korea was like a supply base to Japan at the time. Not only rice production, but also human resources were exploited in a large scale. So here, 600,000 people were sent to Japan in different forms as laborers, or like slaves, or as soldiers. Some were volunteers, like the General Park. He applied for the military academy, and then he failed, so he wrote a letter with his finger, bleeding finger, and then he was accepted. So there were many Koreans who collaborated with the imperialists, like General Park, who became the president afterwards. So the most worst form of exploitation, as you know, is comfort woman, which Japanese government do not accept. They continue to refuse to accept their wrongdoings in their colonial rule. There are only less than 50 the former sex slaves still survive. So Japanese people seem to be waiting for them to all die. So once there was a meeting with Japanese, I told them this way: you are losing the time to properly apologize to your past wrongdoings. When I was young, I read an article in which it says the dam building construction site, when Korean laborer fell, they simply covered the body with cement. They did not try to save the laborer. So after the March movement, still Korean people are proud of this event. But development after the event does not seem to be so positive, but this is some of them. Foreigners, especially missionaries, they spread the atrocities with their pictures around the world. And then Korean provisional government was established in China, in Shanghai. And then people consider that March 4th movement in China was influenced by April 1st movement. I found that there are some documents or articles, professional articles, scholastic articles mentioning this fact. So especially Beijing and north and eastern part of Chinese people, they were deeply impressed by March 1st movement. So they began to stage their own way of movement, which was culminated in May 4th movement. So they began to boycott Japanese products after March. On social impact, so after March 1st movement, the Yangban class and aristocratic class of Korea, they consider they disappeared in the society. But I do not think it completely disappeared at the time. But after the Korean War, that legacy completely eradicated. So I was born in 1948, January. So I barely remember Korean War, but so I remember two incidents from my youth, but still at the time the legacy of Yangban class still stayed. So I experienced the difference between Yangban class and then others as well. But internally, people, some intellectuals, some did not, even though they were very much patriotic, they refused to join the declaration. And then some people began to criticize that kind of large-scale, unprepared movement, producing so much casualties, damages to the population. And then afterwards, the literature, most of the literary works afterwards seem to be losing energy. They wrote only love. They did not write about social issues. So because of the atrocities during the movement, many intelligentsia either they lost vigor to fight, or the other part of intellectuals went to can you imagine where they went? To mostly armed struggles. Many people became decadent, even in writing. Some others became leftist, activist. So some scholars assert that after 1920, most of the anti-colonial movement in Korea were led by leftist movement or some Christian movement. I heard from a nurse, old nurse, who worked at Chonnam National Hospital after World War II. She told me that everybody in the hospital were communists. Everybody. Which means intellectuals at the time, they accepted the leftist ideology because they did not find any other ways of analyzing the situation at the time. So quite a lot of people became submissive to the colonial rule, but still the general, relatively higher level of peaceful way of demonstration brought some heart of the other people. For example, the Nobel laureate at the time, Tagore, he wrote a poem about Korea. This guy. This is the poem, even though I'm not sure whether exactly the verse is correct or not. So he predicted that Korea will become leading light of Asia. And then afterwards, some more, even the legacies of colonialism still stay even now. When I was younger, or quite until recently, Koreans frequently say there is no hope to Koreans. That kind of attitude began to disappear only in 1990s. Until 1980s, democracy in Korea is like a rose in a trash can, which is impossible to the Koreans. And then I was young, my teachers frequently said, hopeless Koreans. They themselves are Koreans, but they were brainwashed that way when they were young, when they were taught in schools. They were taught that way. So, hopeless Koreans. It was like that kind of phrases stay in their mouth all the time. Whenever they tried it, their students, they said, hopeless Koreans. You hopeless Koreans. the military dictatorship after the colonialism is not a symptom only Korea experience. It is worldwide phenomenon. Everywhere after colonialism, the people suffered military dictatorship either by the military or collaborators, colonial collaborators, or by those who fought against colonialism. Either way, they suffered from military dictatorship or civilian dictatorship. So Korea is a rare example which got rid of the military dictatorship after the independence. Or higher level of democracy, even though at the moment we cannot name Korea as a truly democratic, because there is no freedom of speech here. Especially the TVs are strictly under the control of the government. And then division of Korea, even though we were ruled by Japan, US and then Soviet Union decided to divide Korea because US government at that time wanted to keep Japan intact. So they gave Korea to the Soviet Union, dividing Korea, even though we did not do anything wrong in World War II. So it is another uncurable legacy we inherited from colonialism. And then Japan also. Japanese at that time negotiated with the US to keep themselves united while proposing Korea to be divided. So they kept united, they kept themselves united at the cost of Korean Peninsula. And then again, colonial collaborators are still, or rather, the colonial rulers are still in power in Japan. And then in Korea as well. As you already well are aware of, the current Prime Minister Abe is grandson of Gishi. Gishi is a war criminal, Class B. He was supported by US occupying forces to be the prime minister in 1955. So after 10 years after the World War II, the war criminal became the prime minister, which means the war criminal, the mentality war criminals still rule over Japan. Same in Korea. After Mr. Lee came to Korea, he was supported by colonial collaborators, and then US forces in Korea, they suppressed People's Self-Ruling Committee. Then after they came into Korea, they proclaimed all civic organizations should be disbanded. And then they reinstated Japanese colonial government officials, especially Japanese police forces. So one of the most prominent activists under Japanese rule was Kim Won-bong. He was a Korean language scholar. He was considered the first disciple or student of Ju Shikyung, who is very famous Korean language scholar, and then he participated in military struggle. He came back to Korea, to Seoul, Then he was arrested by former Japanese policeman, tortured. Then he escaped the prison. Can you imagine where he went? To the north. Nowhere to go. And then he became the first prime minister of North Korea. So people frequently consider North Korean language policy was created by Kim Il-sung, which is not true. As a first prime minister, he implemented the language policy in North Korea. He abolished Chinese characters. So he set up the policy to make the most of traditional Korean language. So in North Korea, goalkeeper is not goalkeeper. In South Korea, we name it goalkeeper using English, but in North Korea, gate, 문지기. So as a language major, I like his policy. Even though I teach English, learning or teaching English is different, quite different from keeping Korean language developed in its own. But he was executed later, again by Kim Il-sung, because Kim Il-sung executed the officials from China, because he wanted to monopolize. As I told you, after the colonial rule, the people were governed either by colonial collaborators or the fighters against the colonialists. So now, even like the current president is a daughter of former Japanese soldier, Mr. Park. We are now indirectly or directly under the rule of colonial collaborators. That's why the current government is trying to justify Japanese rule in Korea. That's what Japanese rulers are doing in Japan. They are distorting the history, which we cannot imagine in Europe, for example, in Germany. So after World War II, US forces in Japan and in Korea, they wanted to keep communist expansion here by mobilizing colonial rulers and then colonial collaborators in Korea. So nobody in Korea was executed for the collaboration to the Japanese colonialists. In France, after De Gaulle came back to France, about 7,000 collaborators, Nazi collaborators, were executed without trial. But in Korea, none. In South Korea, I mean. So many of the children of past colonial collaborators are still in power. I can name some of them, including the current president. So that is the legacy we still cannot get rid of, because they have the power. They are distorting the history now, which is not allowed in Germany, for example. In Germany, if you advocate the war criminals in World War II, you are imprisoned. So the problem here, to the people, we do not have the perception, high level of perception on social justice, and then wrong and bad. The division becomes blurred by this kind of political situation. And then Gwangju, and then this area is like an island in Korea in that regard. So here we can talk about human rights, social justice, but in Seoul it is relatively possible. In other parts of Korea, if you are too much advocating human rights, social